Everyone, and welcome to our new home. This morning, a just completed ABC News poll shows increasing concerns about the president's policy in Iraq. George Will and I will talk to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Richard Myers. Then I'm on the campaign trail with Howard Dean, the man who has rocketed from the bottom to the top of the Democratic pack by blistering President Bush. And our morning briefing, George Will on Iraq and Vietnam, Michel Martin on Schwarzenegger and women, plus Bill Clinton in Iowa, and our picks of the week, a feature we call The List. It's all coming up this morning.
From ABC News, This Week with George Stephanopoulos. Now, reporting from the ABC News studios in Washington, George Stephanopoulos.
As you can see, this week has a new face and some new tools. We're going to try to give you even more for the hour you invest with us each Sunday. Our look may have changed, but our mission is the same, to help you make sense of what's happening in Washington and the world. In the headlines this morning, Secretary of State Colin Powell arrived in Baghdad today on the heels of another deadly attack on U.S. soldiers. One American was killed and 3 wounded in a rocket attack on a U.S. convoy. And our new ABC News Washington Post poll shows major slippage in the support for the president's handling of Iraq. At the end of April, 75% of those polled approved of the president's policy. It's now 52%. Public support for Bush's foreign policy has never been lower. Only 38% of Americans backed President Bush's request for $87 billion to fund the Iraq mission. 61% oppose. All of which brings us to our headliner this Sunday, General Richard Myers, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He told the Senate this week, this is a battle of wills. We can't let them win. General, good morning.
Morning, George.
I want to get to more of that poll in a minute, but first I want to show these pictures from Fallujah from yesterday. That's in Iraq. It's the place where 12 Iraqi police officers were killed by American officers on Friday. What more can you tell us about this incident?
Well, the first thing is it happened at midnight. We responded, U.S. forces responded to an incident. There is a look at that right now to see exactly what did happen, because it's a little bit confusing being that it was in the dark. But it's like other friendly fire incidents, if in fact it happened the way we think it happened. And
according to the Iraqis on the scene, they say that no Iraqi ammunition was found on the ground. The Iraqi weapons were still on safety.
We're going to have to wait and see how that all plays out, and as we look at that, and we'll do that, and of course take steps to make sure it doesn't happen again. As you know, oftentimes we are patrolling with Iraqis, with Iraqi police. And they're a big part of turning this country over to Iraq, so we don't want this to happen again.
In the past, the United States has paid compensation to the families of those killed in friendly fire incidents. The mayor of Fallujah was reported this morning to say that U.S. commanders have already offered to pay that compensation. Is that true?
I don't know that, but that'll be worked by Central Command and by General Sanchez there in Baghdad, and we'll do the right thing.
Also overnight, as we reported, another American was killed overnight, 3 wounded in that rocket attack. And it comes at a time where Americans are getting more and more concerned about the casualties. Look at this poll. It shows that back in April, 66% of Americans thought the number of casualties was acceptable. Today, that's down to 43%. Only 43% of the country thinks that those casualties are acceptable. And a lot of people say the answer to the security problem, the answer to the casualties, is actually more American troops.
Right, and you know, that's been the theme now for the last 2, 3, 4 weeks, and it's not right. We've got to recognize a couple of things. We are a nation at war. This is the war on terrorism. If we have to be successful in Iraq. We have no choice. Defeat is not an option. It's going to be hard. We are taking some casualties, and that's a product of this conflict that's going on. At the same time, a lot of good things are happening in Iraq. The largest part of the coalition are actually the Iraqis, 55,000 plus Iraqis now, trained, in uniform, armed, doing security work for Iraq. And that's exactly as it should be. That number will continue to grow, and will probably triple by 05.
Excuse me, but in the meantime, President Bush, other members of the administration have said that more foreign troops, you'd like more foreign troops to help there with the situation. It doesn't look from Secretary Powell's trip yesterday that that's going to happen anytime fast. The meetings in Geneva did not go particularly well. How much longer can you wait without reinforcements?
Well, it's not a question of reinforcements. If you talk to any of the military commanders there, and that's who we rely on for their advice, if you talk to any of them, they don't want more American troops. And the security picture is not just a matter of troops, it's also the political governance piece, it's also the economic piece. They all have to work together to provide security and a way forward for Iraqis. And I would say on all 3 fronts, Ambassador Bremer has done a very good job. For instance, just last week, the Arab League recognized the interim foreign minister in the cabinet of Iraq gave them a seat at the table. That is huge news that they recognize this interim authority and their new cabinet. And in the economic side, there's a lot to do. There's some infrastructure that has to be fixed, of course, but all that is taking place and proceeding apace. I would say my view is, talking to commanders on the ground, talking to General Abizaid, that all the trend lines actually are up in Iraq, and people need to know that.
George?
General, one trend line that certainly is up is the tempo of operations of the military all over the world. The administration position is that we not only don't need more boots on the ground in Iraq, we don't need a bigger armed services in general. But are we, because of the strain that the tempo puts on our armed forces, building up a retention problem, particularly with regard to the reserves? People may say, we can't handle this, can't have a family and stay in the military.
Right, and it's one of the issues that the Secretary and that I and the other service chiefs, we work this very, very hard. And one of the things that we owe the people of our armed forces, whether they're on active duty, particularly in the reserve component, is the predictability of their service. Realizing at the same time that we are a nation at war and that we have extraordinary demands on our armed forces right now. We don't think these extraordinary demands are going to last forever. So we've got to balance that very quickly. We could do a better job in providing predictability. On the other hand, every time I meet a reservist in the field, they are proud to serve. They understand why they're there. Their families support them. Their employers support them. Our job is to try to put as much predictability into their lives as we can, and we work that every day.
It used to be American strategic doctrine that we could fight and win 2 major regional wars at once. We're a long way from that now, aren't we?
No, I don't think so. Our new defense strategy that came out of the Quadrennial Defense Review back now almost a year and a half, 2 years ago, it says we've got to be able to do 2, swiftly defeat the efforts of some enemy action somewhere. One of them we take to a win decisively. We are involved in a win decisive conflict right now in Iraq, and we still have the capability to do the swiftly defeat the efforts of another contingency somewhere else in the world. And that's something that we look at very, very closely. That does not mean that our forces aren't very, very busy right now, and that it's not going to take probably the most careful management that we've ever had to put on this problem in the last several years. We will have to do that.
Does the fact that we're so busy everywhere, as you say, mean that in an emergency that we can't anticipate now, Korea, Taiwan, somewhere, we could wind up being pushed to contemplate non-conventional weapons?
No, I don't think we're not near that point. We have the conventional force to do what we need to do to satisfy the defense strategy. Like I said, it's going to take some very careful planning, and we on the Joint Staff, at the behest of the Secretary of Defense, look at this periodically. What's our capability? The forces we have already employed in the Balkans, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, other places in the world, and then what's our capability to fulfill our defense strategy? And we're confident we can do that.
The basic military capability is to kill people and break things. That's a phrase one hears around the military recently from General Zinni. We read, however, about the 101st Airborne refurbishing a swimming pool, fixing up a playground, painting a school. Doubtless good for goodwill, but is this what we're trained to do? And is there a danger that the fighting capacities of our armed forces will be diminished by being put in essentially civil affairs duty?
I don't think so at all. And it is, and you're right in a sense. We are, my view, the best armed forces in the world. And we have not only courage as warriors, the folks that are out there in Iraq, around the world, have courage as warriors. They also have compassion. And what you're seeing is, after major combat is over, in the 101st, the 4th Infantry Division, the 1st Armored Division, the 3rd ACR, that most of their time is spent working governance issues and trying to provide a better governmental and hospitals and schools and those sorts of things. And they spend a lot of time doing that. Actually, our soldiers, because of the values they bring to the fight, are actually quite good at that. That obviously is not something you want to do forever, but that's what we want to do right now, and they're doing a terrific job.
General, the man you work with every day, Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld, has come under a lot of fire recently. I want to show you something that the former Army Secretary, Thomas White, said this morning. Robert McNamara, for 4 years of Vietnam, going down the toilet, was absolutely convinced that a religious zeal, that what he was doing was the right thing. It wasn't until 30 years later that it dawned on him that he was dead wrong. And I think you have the same thing with Don Rumsfeld. That's a very tough indictment.
Yeah, and I think, you know, we hear a lot about gee, the planning hasn't been perfect or so forth regarding Iraq. I couldn't disagree more with that. The planning that went on beforehand was extensive. There is no way we would have...
But excuse me, sir, there was an internal Joint Chiefs of Staff report that was leaked to the Washington Times last week that said it was flawed, that said it was rushed, and said that hurt the hunt for weapons of mass destruction.
That characterization of the report is not exactly right, and that was a half-finished report, so we'll just set that aside. That hadn't been by my desk, so that is not...
So you haven't approved that report yet?
Oh, no, it was in the middle of being worked, and there's a lot more to go on that. And it was looking at strategic lessons learned. But in terms of the planning, and was the planning perfect? No. Did the planning do a lot of good things in terms of oil well fires and internally displaced people and humanitarian crisis, medical crisis? None of that happened. And I think the planning we did averted a lot of that. But often, as you get into these situations, you're confronted with other things that you don't anticipate. But the fact that we've gone from 0 in May to 55,000 plus and growing Iraqis responsible for their own security, that doesn't just happen. You've got to have a plan for that. The fact that we have an Iraqi Governing Council, that we now have a cabinet, that one of the cabinet members, the foreign minister, has got a seat at the table with the Arab League, that doesn't just happen. And it's only natural that the Department of Defense had this responsibility right after major combat. That was an agreement with the National Security Council that the DOD leadership would be responsible for the first part of what's going to happen in Iraq, and that's what we're about right now. And I think we've had great success, and I take exception to those that think that the planning was insufficient.
Okay, General Myers, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll be back with the doctor who wants to be president.
The only thing that I think every president ought to be nervous about is having his finger on the button, because that would be a really awesome responsibility, and every president has to face it.
Is that the part you think you're least prepared for?
No, I actually think I'm the best prepared for that.
How come?
Because I've had to do it before. I've had my finger on a lot of individuals' buttons as a physician.
This Week with George Stephanopoulos is brought to you by Sprint. One Sprint, many solutions.
So where are we on wireless?
Comparing high-speed data networks, Sprint covers 35,000 more people than AT&T Wireless.
And your point would be?
Isn't that 35 million?
Well, that's better coverage. Let's check out Sprint.
Yeah. So I was off by around 34 million people.
You had the right idea.
35 million more people covered than with AT&T Wireless. Get the facts at sprintpcs.com. One Sprint, many solutions.
You'll debate architecture, neighborhoods, and floor plans. But when it comes to your loan, you'll instantly agree on our best price guarantee. Introducing mortgages from Charles Schwab Bank, where we guarantee the best price on your new mortgage or refinancing, or we'll pay you $500. Terms and conditions apply. Call 1-866-7-SCHWAB to speak with a loan consultant to learn more about our best price guarantee.
Now Teflon does something amazing for fabrics. It's pretty remarkable. Clothes and home furnishings with Teflon fabric protector stay soft and comfortable, yet they resist stains and wrinkles. Who knew life could be so easy?
Make every day easy. Make it easy. Make every day easy. Make it easy.
We were on the campaign trail this week with the surprise star of this presidential campaign, former Vermont Governor Howard Dean. Powered by his passionate opposition to the Iraq War and an internet movement that's raised him millions more in campaign funds than he ever expected, Dean has been transformed from long-shot insurgent to top contender. Now, our new ABC poll shows that Senator Joseph Lieberman is still leading nationally with 22% of the vote. Dean, Senator John Kerry, and Congressman Richard Gephardt are all bunched behind at 14%. But in the all-important states of Iowa and New Hampshire, Dean is ahead. And as you'll see, he's drawing huge crowds and heavy fire. We began in Dean's hometown, Burlington, Vermont. Howard Dean is on a precarious perch these days. At the top of the Democratic field in Iowa and New Hampshire, he's come a long way from where his political journey began in 1981, this bike path that he fought to build in Burlington. So what is it that hooked you about the experience?
It was community organizing. It was getting people interested in their community getting people doing the things that you have to do to make democracy work, like writing letters, calling people.
He's also come much farther than his mother ever expected. You decide to run for president, and your mom says it's the silliest thing she ever heard.
And it's preposterous, is what she
Preposterous.
said. And it's very expensive, she said as well.
Why did she think it was so silly?
Well, in my family, you don't do things like that.
Why not?
Because we're a pretty traditional family, and I don't think it ever occurred to anybody that I might run for president. I think my father was astonished when I became governor.
What do you think your father would have thought about this presidential
I don't know
race?
the answer to that. I think secretly, of course, he'd be very proud. But he used to he used to love to tease me about being a Democrat because he was a Republican, and so I'm sure he would write me out of the will about 5 times a day.
Now he was a Republican, come from a long line of investment bankers. When did you break from the Republican past?
I became a Democrat when I was in college.
What was it about?
It was the war. It was the lies that were being told to the American people. That was the big issue. And then it was the Nixon Southern strategy, when the Republicans gave up on civil rights. That combination of those 3 things made me a Democrat.
Now, I've been out on the campaign trail a lot, out with Senator Edwards, out with Congressman Gephardt, a lot of the other candidates, and Congressman Gephardt weaves his family, his father, his mother, his kids into every stump speech. Senator Edwards does the same thing, talks about his working class roots. You've been far more reticent about that. How come?
I'm a reticent person in general. I don't talk a lot about myself, and I don't talk a lot about my family. I think it's really personal.
What do you say to the suggestion that this has been written in some places that, well, the reason you don't do it is you come from Park Avenue in East Hampton, and that doesn't have the political resonance that being the son of a mill worker may have?
That may be true, but that's not why I don't do it. Where I come from is a lot different than where most people think I come from. When people write that I come from Park Avenue or East Hampton or any of that kind of stuff.
Explain that.
Well, they don't talk about the fact that I worked on a ranch in the summer in Florida, which was a cattle ranch in Belle Glade, which has one of the highest poverty rates in America, and that everybody else on the ranch that was working there was a Cuban exile that didn't speak English. They don't talk about some of the experiences I had in the South Bronx when I was practicing medicine during medical school. They don't talk about who I spent my time with during the civil rights movement. What drives me in terms of my desire for social justice comes from all those experiences that get internalized. I somehow suspect that if I talked about them all the time, I wouldn't have the drive and the desire for social justice that I do. It would just be another political way of touching people. I touch people with a passion, and the passion comes from internalizing the people that I've met.
Your success has made you a target. Senator Lieberman says that your trade policies are going to turn the Bush recession into a Dean depression. Just the other night at the Congressional Black Caucus debate, Senator Edwards took you on because you said, I'm the only white candidate in the race who talks about race to white audiences. He said that's simply not true, and he's right, isn't he?
No, he's wrong about that. White politicians always go before black audiences to talk about affirmative action, all this stuff. Sometimes they, as in Joe Lieberman's and Senator Edwards and others' case, talk about protection of civil rights. They talk about what they were doing in the civil rights movement in the 60s and all that thing. That's not talking about race. If you want to talk about race and you're white, you have an obligation to talk about the unconscious bias that people exercise over hiring practices. The fact that
But listen, that's not what you said in the debate. And I've been on the campaign trail with these guys, and Senator Kerry, Senator Edwards, Senator Lieberman, they talk about race in every single
But they don't.
stop.
None of them have attacked the quota system.
All of them have attacked President Bush on affirmative action, said that he shouldn't call it quotas.
But they, well, long after I did.
Now, why not just say, you know what, maybe I shouldn't have said it that way?
Because I think I'm right.
This isn't the only time that you've drawn fire for your use of language. You've had to apologize to Senator Edwards in the past.
The only time I've had to apologize, just for the record.
The only time?
Yes.
So are you worried at all that the fact that you speak bluntly and have had to take back some things that you said might get you into trouble as this campaign goes along?
No.
But
I am not going to be scripted, George. I am not going to be scripted.
And even if that means at times having to take back what you said?
Sure. I have make no bones about apologizing for Senator Edwards for his for my saying he had misconstrued his position on the war. I didn't know it. I made a mistake, and I said so. And when I make a mistake, I'm going to own up to it.
You have changed on various issues. On NAFTA, you used to be a very strong supporter of NAFTA.
George, you're doing it again. I supported NAFTA and wrote a letter to President Clinton in 1992 supporting NAFTA. That's different than, you used to be a very strong supporter of NAFTA.
You were a strong supporter of NAFTA.
I supported NAFTA. Where did you get this? I'm a strong supporter of NAFTA. I never did anything about it. I didn't vote on it. I didn't march down in the street demanding NAFTA. I simply wrote a letter supporting NAFTA.
Well, are you ashamed of that now?
No, I'm not. And I tell the labor unions I did, and I tell them why I did it. Because NAFTA did a lot of positive things for Vermont, because it's right up against the Canadian border.
But now you'd renegotiate.
But what I see you doing is painting me into a corner that I was never in. And that's what that's, in some ways, it's a funny, I don't want to be.
But actually, I don't get this. I mean, you were a supporter of it. You wrote a letter supporting it.
Yeah.
You talked about it.
Right.
And now you have a different position.
No.
Why isn't it right to ask about that and explain what the changes are?
It is fine. I have no problem with you asking about it. But don't put me in a position, which most journalists do, including you, of you were a strong supporter of NAFTA and now it's not true.
So anyway, this is where the path we're on now. The important thing.
A trip to the Internet Command Center with top strategist Joe Trippi suggests that Dean's irritation is reinforced by political calculation.
People really respond when we're under attack. I mean, people just sign up or contribute. They actually have, I think in the last debate, they actually created, our own people created a Dean attack fund. And anytime anybody attacked us in the debate, they would go over and contribute to that fund.
And you also have a rapid response network, too.
Yeah.
To date, the campaign has raised more than $8 million on the internet, more than any campaign ever.
Good morning, Michael. Governor, how are you? Good morning, Frank.
The next day, Dean has 7 stops across the state of New Hampshire, beginning with a visit to fellow doctors at Dartmouth. Do you miss being a doctor?
Well, in some ways. I mean, if you grow up with it and you're heavily involved in it, it's kind of like coming home when you get to discuss
I was going to say, you
medicine.
seem very at home today.
It is. It is.
The campaign's message of the day is mental health policy.
11 million adults in this country live with serious mental illness, and 3 million children suffer from emotional disturbance.
But rival Dick Gephardt has attacked Dean on the subject of Medicare.
In 1995, Governor Dean said Medicare is, quote, one of the worst things that ever happened.
What?
On a conference call with Iowa reporters, Dean is blindsided by the charge.
I think that's pretty silly.
The packed house at Plymouth State College knows nothing about it, so Dean sticks to the stump speech that's working.
As Commander-in-Chief of the United States military, I will not hesitate to send American troops anywhere in the world to defend the United States of America. But as Commander-in-Chief of the United States military, I will never send our sons and our daughters and our brothers and sisters in harm's way in a foreign land without telling the truth to the American people about why they're going.
But the reporters waiting for Dean outside have been fully briefed.
Congressman Gephardt has just delivered remarks in which he said, in 1995, you said that Medicare was one of the worst things that has ever happened.
You know, I'm disappointed in Dick. I worked with him in 1988. I think this is the politics of the past.
On a car ride to Concord, I pressed Dean on the specifics. Congressman Gephardt, I heard what you had to say just out there.
Yeah.
You said sad attack, old politics, but I wanted you to respond to the substance of what he said.
We
supported Medicare in the past.
Of course I support Medicare. That's ridiculous. I certainly have been very angry at Medicare over their bureaucratic stuff. You know, they're really difficult bureaucratically to deal with.
But he goes farther. He also says that in 1995, you specifically supported the $270 billion or so in tax cuts that were called for by Newt Gingrich.
I think that's very unlikely.
Here's the documentation.
I know what Gingrich has said, but this
is what Congressman Gephardt is saying about 1995, and those are the clips supporting it. And it's pretty clear that you said you would accept a 7 to 10% cut in the rate of growth of Medicare, which was the
cutting the rate of growth is much different.
Well, except that the cutting growth rate in 1995 came to $270 billion.
Well, I've got to find out. I've got to find out.
Yeah.
But I think I fully described the notion we should reduce the Medicare growth rate from 10% to 7% or less if possible. I'm sure I said that.
That's what Newt Gingrich was calling for in 1995.
Well, then, but Newt Gingrich probably also called for a strong America, and I believe in that too. I mean, my guess is I could find some things that's like my saying Dick Gephardt is the same as George Bush because they both voted for the war, and Dick Gephardt went to the Rose Garden to support the war. I've never said that. I'm just so disappointed. I worked for this guy in 1988. I really...
His campaign?
Yeah, I worked for his campaign in 88. Now, this is really the pathetic politics of the past.
Why do you think he's doing it?
Because I think he's desperate.
That back in 1995, you also supported cuts in Social Security, cuts in veterans benefits, along the same lines.
You know, I can't respond to that because it was a long time ago. It was 8 years. I will say that in 1995, we had an enormous budget crisis in this country.
We do now, too.
Yes, we do. But now, I know how that can be fixed. And that is, you get rid of the president's tax cuts. The next president of the United States is going to have to confront exactly this. Do we cut veterans benefits? Do we cut Social Security benefits? Do we cut Medicare benefits?
And what's your answer now?
We do not. We don't need to do that. But I have not said that I won't look at the rate of growth of any of these things. If we're in bad trouble, of course we will.
The rest of the ride is more reflective. But you talked when you were before the doctors this morning about spirituality. And I was wondering, how would you describe your spirituality?
I'm actually a pretty religious person, believe it or not.
Well, when I believe it.
Flinty, New England. You know, I think what's missing in this country is a degree of spirituality.
You've had quite a journey. You were raised Roman Catholic. Your wife.
Well, I wasn't raised Roman Catholic. I was baptized Roman Catholic.
Baptized, not raised.
No, raised Episcopalian, and then I ended up as a Congregationalist.
That's what I wanted to ask you about. How did you end up as a Congregationalist?
Because I had a big fight with a local Episcopal church about 25 years ago over the bike path. They have a huge
chunk. The bike path?
They have a big chunk. We were trying to get the bike path built. They had control of about 1.5 miles of railroad bed, and they decided they would pursue a property rights suit to refuse to allow the bike path to be developed.
How does your faith inform your politics?
I'm not sure that it does. I think my faith and my politics are parallel. You know, I consider myself a Christian in the best sense of the word. I think that Christ was somebody who really reached out to those who couldn't fend for themselves. So I think about those things, but I don't know that it informs my politics.
But it informs your sense of ethics.
Yes.
Clearly.
Very much so.
Do you pray?
Yes.
Constantly?
No. Lately.
All afternoon, the attacks keep coming.
John Kerry just put out a press release accusing me of being a Hamas sympathizer.
Dean seems undaunted.
Yes! You can score on 2 points. One because of this and the other because of this. Smile. Get in here. Get in here, Pat.
And he can afford to have a little fun.
I do not like that George and Dick. I do not like them, not one bit.
For this stage of the campaign, he's drawing extraordinarily large and committed crowds. And he knows how to fire them up.
This flag does not belong to the right wing of the Republican Party. It belongs to every single American, and every veteran, and every single one of us. You have the power to take this country back and make it our country again, not Jerry Falwell's country, not Rush Limbaugh's country, not John Ashcroft's country, and we have the power to take the White House back in 2004, and that is exactly what we are going to do. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
You guys are the best.
The day ends with a visit to Manchester's Greek Festival.
Man, those are really good. Those are great. Maple. Only New Hampshire and Vermont Greeks do this.
And a final talk about all those attacks. You don't look it right now, but do you feel embattled?
No, I really don't. I've got to get used to it, of course. You know, you don't usually have 4 people going after you at the same time, plus the Republican governor. But that's what's going to happen. You know, we're doing well, and when you do well, the other guys want to catch up. And I think they're choosing the wrong way to do it. I think they're making a mistake. But, you know, it's their strategy. They got to deal with what they got to deal with.
How do you fight back?
In some ways, you don't. In some ways, you run against George Bush. Because for me, I don't want to make the mistake that they made early on. You know, if you're doing well, what Democrats want is for us to beat George Bush. They don't like the fighting between us. So what I'm going to try to do is just stiff arm him and then keep my attention on the president.
Still having fun?
Actually, this size stuff I love.
George Will and Michelle Martin are coming up, but when we come back, the list.
We see Michael. Marine biologist, astronomer. Or maybe astronaut. At Microsoft, we started Club Tech with Boys and Girls Clubs of America. So kids learn more than just what computers can do. They learn what they themselves can do.
Cash or credit? Oh, hey, Yahoo. Oh, making me dizzy. Oh, Bank One. British Airways?
Bank One.
Top of the morning to you. I'm not really British. I sound like it, don't I? Borders. Let me guess. Bank One? Bank One. Bank One. Hey, Helen, another Bank One.
Hundreds of leading names, one you.
This is so you.
Find the card that fits you best.
Cute dog. Oh, you two have the same eyes.
Individual answers. Bank One.
Celine Dion. They said she'd never make it in Vegas, but now she's gearing up for her 100th sold-out show. And Monday, she's giving you an all-access pass to her private backstage Vegas. Plus, these math geeks beat the house for millions, and there was nothing the casinos could do about it. So, how'd they do it? Find out when we take you to Vegas on the premiere of Primetime Monday.
Every morning, the president reads one report first. This top secret document updates all threats against America. This report is called The Threat Matrix. ABC presents a powerful new drama about our team protecting America. Threat Matrix premieres Thursday at 8/7 Central on ABC.
All week long, we're bombarded with sounds, images, and information. So on Sundays, we're going to try to sort out those that separate themselves from the rest. We call it the list, the words and pictures that broke through and made a difference. We begin with images. 9/11 was remembered in New York. But also in Malibu, where a mother recalled her husband who died fighting hijackers on United Flight 93. Not just in the U.S., but also in Baghdad. After another suicide bombing in Israel, grief. And in Gaza, retaliation. But finally, the aftermath of war, seeds of hope in Afghanistan. Then there are the words. Which ones will last? President Bush begins our collection of voices.
We will do what is necessary. We will spend what is necessary to achieve this essential victory in the war on terror, to promote freedom, and to make our own nation more secure.
But from anti-war Senator Robert Byrd, Democrat of West Virginia, I, for one, will not simply rubber stamp this request. Congress is not an ATM. Lieutenant General James Conway is the commander of the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force.
I used to think Americans were the most impatient people on earth. I now believe that distinction belongs to the Iraqis.
Hallie Cornell talked to Tyler, her 5-year-old daughter, about her husband, an Army reservist. She said, "So Daddy's going to stay for a month longer?" And I said, "Yeah." I didn't want to tell her it could be another 6. And it was former Vice President Dan Quayle's turn to be immortalized, while the current number 2 looked on.
Being cast in marble is something that every vice president looks forward to. It's not only a high honor, it's our one shot at being remembered.
And finally, the man in black. There were a lot of tributes following the passing of country music giant Johnny Cash. But perhaps the simplest and most eloquent came from Bono. He was more than wise. In a garden full of weeds, the oak tree. Back in the last presidential campaign, a study by the Pew Center found that about half of American voters actually get their information about the candidates from late-night TV. Because so many people use the comics to form their opinions, we're going to keep our eye on them. We call it the Sunday Funnies.
But don't think the president interrupted your Sunday night TV viewing just to talk abstractions. The real purpose of the speech, the most expensive pledge break ever.
I will soon submit to Congress a request for $87 billion.
Now that sounds like a lot, although Bush did remind Congress it's only $4,360,902,000 easy payments of 1995.
And it looks like the cost for rebuilding Iraq is estimated at $60 billion. But some good news. Today, the guys from Queer As and the Straight Guys said they could do it for $40 billion. do the whole thing.
Let's see, $87 billion seems like a lot of money to repair $65 million in damages, but when you bomb a nation to rubble, it's customary to tip at least 15%.
$80 billion. And when you make out that check, remember there are 2 L's in Halliburton.
When we come back, George Will and Michel Martin with the Sunday Briefing.
This Week with George Stephanopoulos will continue in a moment, after this from our ABC stations.
ABC pays tribute to a legend, John Ritter Remembered, hosted by Diane Sawyer at 8/7 Central ABC Tuesday.
They wanted the perfect baby, but did malpractice leave their son paralyzed and brain damaged? This child will never be normal for the rest of their life. Did a doctor's mistake destroy their dreams for a family? He removed your cervix. And did a careless error cost her everything?
The doctor left this gauze inside of her abdomen.
They expected millions for their suffering, and so would you. But find out what they really got.
What's the price for life?
On the next Montel.
Monday at 3 on ABC 3340.
The Greater Birmingham Humane Society have many adorable pets that need a good, loving home. For more details, call 205-780-7281. This community calendar moment is brought to you by Sarah Toyota, Sarah Chevrolet, and ABC 3340. Get set for the Birmingham Consumer Connect Expo this weekend at the BJCC. It's Alabama's first mega consumer show with hundreds of vendors. On Sunday, meet your favorite ABC 3340 news personalities from 2 to 4 p.m.
Hello, I'm Valerie Carter. Thanks for watching ABC 3340.
We begin our morning briefing examining something that's being heard more and more, that Iraq is starting to look like Vietnam. You saw that quote from former Army Secretary Thomas White earlier in the broadcast. Last week, former Chief of Central Command Anthony Zinni made a similar point, and Democrats are starting to fold it into their critique of President Bush. Here's Senator Tom Harkin of Iowa.
This may not be. And every time I see these bills coming down for the money, it's costing like Vietnam, too.
There are also some striking similarities between the speeches of Lyndon Johnson and George Bush.
The result would be increased unrest and instability and even wider war.
Retreat in the face of terror would only invite further and bolder attacks.
World War II was fought in both Europe and Asia, and when it ended, we found ourselves with continued responsibility for the defense of freedom.
Following World War II, we lifted up the defeated nations of Japan and Germany and stood with them as they built representative governments. We committed years and resources to this cause.
For our part, I will ask the Congress to join in a $1 billion American investment in this effort as soon as it is underway.
I will soon submit to Congress a request for $87 billion.
Well, we heard what General Myers had to say about that analogy. Now for more, I'm joined again by our man with historical perspective, George Will. What do you think of it?
George, historical analogies can serve our thinking or they can become a substitute for thinking. For years, when America seemed to be too accommodating, the specter of Munich was invoked, the failed attempt to appease Hitler by giving him bits of Czechoslovakia in 1938. Then, when America seemed for years to be too assertive in the world, the cautionary example was Vietnam. But there's a third example, a third analogy that worries the Pentagon. It's Algeria, the Battle of Algiers. A movie was made about that, and recently, some Pentagon officers were summoned to the movies to try and learn a lesson.
En définitive, nous sommes arrivés à la moyenne de 4,2 attentats par jour. Oui, il faut distinguer les attaques individuelles et les attentats à la bombe. Comme toujours, les termes du problème sont primo, l'adversaire, secondo, les moyens de le détruire. Il y a près de 400 000 Arabes à Alger. Sont-ils tous nos ennemis? Nous savons bien que non. Nous disons qu'il y a une minorité qui s'impose par la terreur et la violence. Nous devons agir sur cette minorité dans le but de l'isoler et de la détruire.
Boy, George, that sounds familiar. The enemy is a small minority. The people are with us. That's what everyone told us in Vietnam. That's what we're hearing today. You think it's more true now?
I do think it's more true now. In Vietnam, we were fighting armies. At the end, they had tanks, Soviet tanks. We were fighting two armies, actually. The Viet Cong, which, unlike the Ba'athist remnants or whoever is waging this resistance to it, had been fighting for 20 years. Experienced, disciplined army with great leaders. Ho Chi Minh in North Vietnam, General Giap. We don't know who, if anyone, is leading these elements that are attacking our forces, but it's certainly there's no General Giap out there.
One other thing that's unmistakable from looking at that clip is that Baghdad looks a lot more like Algeria than North Vietnam.
Well, that's right. This is urban warfare. The military for years now has been aware of the fact the world is increasingly urbanized. And I know that as recently as Commandant Krulak of the Marine Corps and others were taking very seriously the Russians' experience in Chechnya, which was devastating urban warfare. So that's not new. What is new is the idea that the urban conflict, and that's what it is today in Iraq, has to be urban. There's no vegetation. You can't come at Baghdad or come at our forces without aerial surveillance and instant destruction. So it has to be fighting as in the Kasbah.
Let me throw out another analogy that was put out first by Jonathan Rauch in the magazine National Journal. He said the right way to think about this is that it's World War IV. We fought world wars against fascism, we fought world wars against communism, and now we're actually engaged in a world war against Islamic totalitarianism.
But fascism, at least in Europe, was a civil war within European civilization. And what we really face with Islam and the Arab world is a civil war within the Arab world, and we're taking sides. There are the fundamentalists, the anti-Americans, the extremists, the theocrats. But on the other side, there are modernizers. Surely people who want to bring the Arab world into the 20th century and then into the 21st century. So there's a civil war in which we're taking sides. I think that's more.
But we're putting these modernizers in a vice. I mean, I was reading all of these stories coming out of Fallujah this weekend, and the local imams who had been moderate, who had been working with the United States, say, no, 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 this is a sign that they're just the enemy. They have to get out.
I'll believe it when I see it. I believe the polls that have been taken over there, Zogby's taken some, AEI had him do it, indicate that the majority, silent majority if you will, wants Americans there, wants Americans to leave as soon as possible, but they know what possibility means when they have the structures of civil society. That's expensive, by the way.
Well, I was just going to ask you about that.
We heard Mr. Harkin say this is expensive, and the bills remind him of Vietnam. Measured as the only sensible way to measure it, by the size of the economy that must pay the bills, by my calculations, I think the cost of Iraq today is about 1/12 to 1/20th of what the cost of Vietnam was.
Okay, George, thanks very much. When we come back, sexual politics in the California recall election.
The first rule of investing, diversify. A good way to do it? Spiders. Spiders are all the stocks of the S&P 500 in one share. Instant diversification. Low fees and tax efficient too. Spiders, listed on the American Stock Exchange. Details at amex.com/SPY.
The great ones elevate their performance. On the biggest stages, with the highest stakes, they're able to summon something extra, and by sheer will, produce wonders. As a global energy leader, expect big things from ConocoPhillips, and watch our performance elevate.
Hi, Tom. I know it's your first day, but we could really use your help.
You got it.
Thanks, we're just in a bit of a jam. All this has to get out today.
Yeah, I don't do shipping.
Oh, no, it's very easy. We use FedEx.com. Anybody can do it.
You don't understand. I have an MBA.
Oh, you have an MBA. In that case, I'll have to show you how to do it.
FedEx.com makes shipping so fast and easy, even an MBA can do it. Relax, it's FedEx.
Of course you're going to invest in a 529 college savings plan.
It's federal tax-free.
But you want it managed right.
Not just through up markets, but down markets.
Through potty training?
And swim meets. And broken curfews. And strange piercings. Hey, getting the money ready could be a lot less painful than getting the kids ready.
Make sure your 529 is managed by some of the best in the business. Call 1-800-FIDELITY or ask your advisor for more information.
Bill Parcells, my coach, is now coaching for the Dallas Cowboys. I'm just going to sit here and wait till I wake up.
Cowboys, Giants, Monday night on ABC.
In 2 weeks.
I'd be such a natural here.
Everything about the practice is changing.
It's time for Plan B.
Accept everything you love.
We do not commit blackmail in this firm.
Get ready for a season of surprises.
Kind of like sex.
The practice season premiere in 2 weeks on ABC.
Now to the latest twist in the Schwarzenegger story. By now you all know about the interview Arnold did with We magazine in 1977, the one where he brags about group sex and uses demeaning terms to describe gays. Well, the campaign's made a number of passes at containing the damage. First, Arnold said he wasn't thinking about running for governor 25 years ago. Then that he didn't remember what happened, followed by the suggestion that he may have been making the whole story up in the first place, just to get publicity. Now he's taking a new tack. Tomorrow, Oprah will debut with two of the biggest gets of the season, Schwarzenegger and his wife, Maria Shriver. This week, Michel Martin's been following the maneuvers. And Michelle, when this started out, the campaign hoped it wasn't going to be a big deal.
Well, that's understandable, and it's also typical. This story has followed a pattern that's actually very familiar with stories involving alleged sexual improprieties in public figures.
Nobody knows how to handle it.
No, in fact, including the reporters who are covering these races, they don't know whether the allegations are true. They are questioning whether they are relevant to the office at hand, and they want to know whether they'll have an impact on the race. But it's obvious that the campaign is taking it seriously now.
And it is having an impact on the race.
Well, I think you can see that by the choices that the campaign is making. I mean, first of all, the Oprah interview, which you mentioned. Yesterday, the candidate took pains to go to a Republican women's luncheon where he opened with what has become a stock applause line.
One day soon, America is going to have the first woman president. And that's right.
Now, while this was going on, there was also a small demonstration outside by a group that got together specifically to call attention to allegations that have been made against Schwarzenegger, mainly that he's a misogynist, that he behaves boorishly toward women, that he sexually harasses them on his movie sets. And while the demonstration yesterday was small, I wouldn't underestimate this group. I mean, they first got together as an anti-war group. I covered them during the anti-war effort, and they have a proven effectiveness in creating attention-getting events, so they could have an impact, particularly because this is a short time frame race.
And even though they're not representative, there is something of a gender gap here.
There is a gender gap. It's no more pronounced than one has normally found in national and high-profile races. I mean, this has been a fixture in American politics over the last 20 years, women tending to favor Democrats, men tending to favor Republicans. Interestingly enough, Schwarzenegger has a couple things going for him. One is that Republican women like him more than Republican men do. Some of the latest surveys show that 50% of Republican women support his candidacy versus 40% of Republican men. And the other interesting thing is that men who've been polled overall seem to be more committed to their choice than the women seem to be. So he may have more intensity of support than his opponents have.
Now, how scripted is this Oprah appearance?
Well, I think you'd have to assume that it's going to be, it's high-stakes poker for both sides. I mean, Oprah has identified the couple as friends of hers. I mean, she said that Maria Shriver particularly is a friend of hers, that she's friends with the couple. On the other hand, there's a lot of pressure on her to ask some tough questions. The fact is that he has not been asked specifically whether this conduct is true. He hasn't been asked pointedly how he feels about it now. And there's some pressure on her to do that. In fact, her career is all about personal accountability.
So you think she's going to ask the questions?
I think she may. I mean, some of these groups who are demonstrating have been emailing and trying to organize other women's groups to ask and to demand, in fact, that she do so. So I think that there's a very strong chance that she may. I mean, part of her career is all about personal accountability and people taking responsibility for their actions. So I wouldn't be surprised if she did. It's interesting to note, however, that most of the appearance involves Maria Shriver, not Arnold Schwarzenegger. He comes in later, and it isn't even the whole hour. The rest of the hour is Beyonce Knowles.
We'll be watching both. Thanks, Michelle. While Arnold jets to Chicago today for that Oprah appearance, another big gun is heading to California to help Governor Gray Davis fight the recall. Former President Bill Clinton will campaign with Davis today after an appearance yesterday with the Democratic presidential field at Senator Tom Harkin's annual steak fry in Iowa. Our political director, Mark Halpern, worked the rope line with the former president, who wasn't shy about taking on the policies of the man who replaced him.
But I don't think anybody has really put the connection between the call for sacrifice, the fact that people like me who are making a good living and in the maximum income, up to the highest income group, not only have not been asked to sacrifice, they've thrown money at us for 3 years, literally thrown money at us, while kicking poor kids out of after-school programs, uniformed police off the street, including people in New York, unemployed workers out of their training programs, kids out of student loans. I mean, this is a very serious problem. And then there's 6.5 million families that didn't get the child tax credit, and including over 200,000 uniformed service personnel that are serving our people. And I don't think we have to get in a big tizzy about it. We just have to say we disagree. Not because we don't favor wealth, but because that's not the way to create wealth. The way to create wealth is to be fair to everybody. I think we proved that.
If the new ABC poll is any indication, Democrats may find a receptive audience to that message. It shows that 56% of Americans disapprove of how President Bush is handling the economy. That's a big shift from last April and the president's worst numbers on the economy since he came to office. In his speech, President Clinton also told the 7 Democratic candidates there with him in Iowa to hammer home their differences with President Bush. And he showed some modesty when he flattered the field, calling it the strongest in decades. We're going to have an email about the high price of gasoline after this economic update.
You can't play touch football at Lambeau Field. You won't find a pickup basketball game at the Garden. And they won't let your softball league play in this ballpark. But when it comes to golf, you can play where the pros play. Make a qualifying deposit into a Schwab account and receive up to 4 rounds of golf at some of the country's top golf venues, including the TPC at Sawgrass. Just call 1-888-4-SCHWAB. Of course, we do recommend you bring some extra golf balls.
This week's economic summary brought to you by Charles Schwab. There's never been a better time for Charles Schwab.
Isn't it nice when things just work? All day, every day. And you feel confident you made the right choice. Nothing works like a Delta faucet. Delta, beautifully engineered.
Camp was great, Mom. I saw 5 snakes. I got a fish. You wanna go, do what you wanna do.
There's a different way to treat seasonal allergies. Singulair, the only seasonal allergy medicine that specifically blocks leukotrienes, an underlying cause of allergy symptoms. It's a once-a-day chewable tablet that helps relieve a broad range of symptoms for a full 24 hours. It's available for children as young as 2. Side effects are generally mild and vary by age and may include headache, ear infection, sore throat, and upper respiratory infection. Ask your child's doctor about Singulair. Singulair, a different way to treat seasonal allergies.
Swimming, we went canoeing, we did all kinds of fun stuff.
Blue defined the rules for drama. Just 2 more Tuesdays until Blue does it again.
The 15th precinct is a hotbed of corruption.
Talking about my generation.
Blue, it's Law and Order, their way. Blue's stunning season opener, ABC Tuesday, September 23rd, 10/9 Central. Viewer discretion advised.
In this week's email, Chris Miller of Cary, Illinois, wants to know why gasoline prices are going up when the price of crude oil is going down. Why are we paying more at the pump now? This is pure gouging to the consumer, and the corporate giants of the gasoline companies are making out like bandits. Well, Chris, you won't be surprised that that's not how the oil industry sees it. According to the American Petroleum Institute, there's always a 4 to 6 week lag time in the movement between crude prices and gas prices. But the Energy Department has launched an investigation into the gas price spike following last month's power blackout. If anyone did anything wrong, federal prosecutors could be called in. If you have a question or comment, our new email address is abcthisweek@aol.com. Next Sunday, I'll have an exclusive interview with former First Lady Nancy Reagan, as a lifetime of letters by Ronald Reagan is about to be published. Letters Reagan wrote to everyone from Mikhail Gorbachev to Hugh Hefner to his daughter Patty and hundreds of ordinary citizens. Thanks for sharing part of your Sunday with us. Until next week, that's This Week.
Kids are kids. And no matter if they're born here or are part of one of the millions of families that move here, most of them will grow up to pursue the same thing, the American dream of home ownership, the most powerful economic force in the country. We expect there will be 30 million new Americans by 2010. And when they dream of owning homes, Fannie Mae will be there. Because as the American dream grows, so do we.
In the future, everyone's glasses will automatically adjust to changing light and block out harmful UV rays that can damage the eyes. But for those with transitions lenses, the future is already here. Ask your eye care professional, because the danger is real now, and so is the protection. Transitions.
I can't even remember what I wanted to be when I was a little kid, but I've always wanted to help. I'm always the one to raise my hand and do whatever. You know, I'm an employee, but I'm also the director of benefits, so, you know, I have that balance. Benefits is a thankless job, it really is. But you know you're doing a service. You know that people appreciate it who need it. And it's like, oh, I had coverage, thank you so much.
Every benefits manager has a story to tell. Cigna provides employee benefits that hear them. Cigna, a business of caring.
In 2 weeks.
You ready for this?
The best dramas are on ABC.
You think you're tough? You don't have a prayer of making it through this day.
An explosive new series.
My first day on the job, I don't want to shoot anybody.
10/8, officers on duty.
Who ordered this?
Then there's never been a better time
When did you start playing it safe?
to get into television's most compelling drama.
You were missing for almost 2 years. We thought you were dead.
It's a new beginning.
You're home again.
On Alias. And just when you thought nothing could surprise you,
Are you attracted to me?
Please.
James Spader joins the most risk-taking show on television.
I took from the rich. And who'd you give to? I kept it.
The Practice. The most anticipated premieres of the season.
My mission now is to get you.
In 2 weeks, starting at 8/7 Central.
What it comes down to is faith.
ABC puts on Sunday's Best.
For the latest video highlights, log on to America Online, keyword ABC News. To order a video cassette or transcript of This Week with George Stephanopoulos, dial 1-800-505-6139.
This has been a presentation of ABC News. More Americans get their news from ABC News than from any other source.